This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hello, this is Trent York, the CFO of Restore Hyper Wellness, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 927.
We're using AI already to increase productivity, it's making it easier to access the right answer based on all of the answers that have been provided historically. It's improving response times. It's just generally helping our merchants get the help they need faster, better and faster information. So it's kind of a win-win. It's not just about AI replacing people. It's enabling people to do their jobs more efficiently and better. And then separately, we're just beginning to see how profound AI can be for the platform and for the product itself. We plan to build out AI functionality into every aspect of the merchant experience. But we also want to be intentional and thoughtful and not just, add stuff for the sake of having AI.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Matt Gustke, CFO of WooCommerce. No matter how many phone calls Matt Gustke receives during the span of his finance career, no one call will likely be more memorable or more important than one he received nearly 22 years ago. At the time, Gustke, a research analyst for a major bank, was spending his days assessing the carnage piling up in the aftermath of the dotcom bubble burst. It was then that Gustke tells us he received a phone call from the late Rajiv Dutta, a widely known finance leader who at the time was CFO of eBay. Dutta invited Gustke to lunch, and only a week later, Gustke tells us he was a member of eBay's finance team. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Matt Gustke, CFO of WooCommerce. Matt, welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So, Matt, we always begin with this question, which is to have you look back for us and identify some of the experiences you feel prepared you to be a finance leader. What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, well, I suppose, for as far as I can remember, I always wanted to have a career in finance. As a kid, I loved reading stock quotes in the newspaper back then when that was still a thing. And I'd even go to the public library and read company reports and Value Line. So I guess that was my first experience that played out over several years, which is that I was inherently drawn to finance. It was easy to make a career out of something when putting in the time and effort didn't seem like work, but rather how I wanted to spend my time. So I went all in and did an undergrad in finance at Wharton, which was an amazing experience. It gave me, of course, a really good foundation in how all the parts of finance and business generally come together. So after college, I spent the early part of my career in equity research at the technology-focused investment bank Hambrecht& Quist, which was acquired by Chase while I was there and ultimately became part of JP Morgan.
If that was related to the dot-com bubble.
You bet. You bet. That was all happened at the same time. Exactly. So I was lucky to land there in a position helping cover the e-commerce sector. And this is back in the late 90s, as you mentioned. There were seemingly endless e-commerce startups, and every company was trying to position themselves as an internet company in one way or another. It was everything from collectibles marketplaces like eBay, where I spent some time later, to insurance brokers taking the industry online, to mattress manufacturers that sensed an opportunity to go direct to consumer, leveraging the internet. So research was great at building foundational skills, such as how to quickly understand different business models and how to translate that into financial models that define the levers that drive the business, and also for getting better at business writing. Unlike in college, there was no luxury to spend weeks writing a perfect essay. And during earnings season, I'd sometimes have to write 4 or 5 reports in a single night. So time management and operating under pressure and with little sleep became very important. But perhaps more important was learning how to keep it simple. Investors had to read all this stuff, and they had even more companies to keep straight in their heads than I did. So understanding how to clearly and quickly articulate how a company was doing based on common denominator metrics like users and unit economics, GMV, revenue, et cetera, but also articulate what made them unique and how well they were or weren't executing on a vision. And I take that with me through to today. Keeping things simple, seeking clarity, get to the point, avoid jargon. Long ago, I stopped worrying in meetings if I was going to ask a stupid question. I figured if it wasn't clear to me and I'm at least of average intelligence, then it probably wasn't clear to somebody else. So I would just ask. And it turns out that more than often than not, that led to a better conversation, more connection, new insights, common understanding, and a clear mandate about what to do after meetings. So then in early 2001, the dot-com bubble had officially burst and times were really weird and uncertain everywhere. Certainly more than average in investment banking and research. Banks like mine were struggling and being sold to larger ones. Layoffs were happening. Teams were restructuring. Everyone was feeling really insecure. So then I got a call that basically changed my life. It was from the CFO of eBay at the time, Rajiv Dutta. He was without doubt my favorite executive at my favorite company. And he basically said, I bet you're not having much fun there anymore. Come have lunch with me and talk about joining eBay. So lunch turned into a full day and night and dinner of meeting the whole team, which was an awesome experience. And a week later, I agreed to join to build out the IR function, which Rajiv was doing himself at the time.
Can I just? I'm going to imagine you maybe in your late 20s when the dot-com bubble comes, and frankly, you're this 20-something analyst who is sitting across the table frequently from C-suite executives, like the gentleman who contacted you from eBay, the CFO from eBay. The research role is really was wonderful for folks like you who are able to build relationships and move on when the time was right.
Yeah, you bet. Not only for building relationships, understanding how they think, understanding how they communicate with investors. So certainly that made that a pretty seamless and easy transition into doing a role like investor relations. It was really just the other side of the table, but putting all my energy into one company and going really deep.
You stay in the Bay Area. I just am curious. Wharton, of course, is out east. Are you from California originally, or did you move to the Bay Area to join HQ?
Yeah. I moved to the Bay Area to join H&Q. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and went out east for school and decided that California dreaming was calling me after school. So I
and
came
you
out
stayed.
here.
It apparently looks from you haven't shared all of where you're headed, but it looks like you stayed. Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all.
But eBay, where you stay nearly 9 years, and you have a rather traditional I would say the different roles that you held. It's certainly a finance career ladder.
Absolutely. But it wasn't really intended to be that. So at the time I joined, I honestly viewed it as like a 1 to 2 year working sabbatical where I'd get to see a company from the inside. But I thought I would ultimately go back to research, but with a better perspective. But as you note, so I actually ended up in the eBay family for 12 years because the end of my journey there, I was the CFO at StubHub, which was part of eBay at the time. So yeah, quite a long run there and accumulating a lot of different experiences. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the next thing, I guess, which is,
well, that's a great door of entry to the CFO office. Then can you illuminate that more for us? Again, there's so many CFOs who lecture us. It's hard to get a CFO job when you're not yet a CFO. Well, it seems like you came up through this, and forgive me for not knowing the relationship with StubHub and eBay. I'm sure it's was a venture that they invested in, or what was the relationship there?
Yeah, it was a business that was acquired by eBay, I think in 2008. And they were focused solely on ticket resale. And at the time, when StubHub was founded, eBay pretty much owned that category of ticket resale. And StubHub, frankly, just beat them and was 10x their size in tickets. So they, we can't beat them, join them. And they acquired the company. So that was great.
That appointment that you received, though, I'm wondering, can you just, whether there must have been other candidates, but you landed it.
Yeah. And I guess a couple of years into my eBay journey, Rajiv came up to me and he said, you know that I know you're doing a great job, and you know how I know it, because investors don't want to talk to me anymore. They just want to talk to you, and that's freeing up so much of my time to do other things. So thanks. So naturally, that felt great to hear that. But then the next thing he said was, and now I need you to go into a different role. So what would you think about leading FP&A for eBay International, which at the time was a relatively small business? It was nascent. We had done a bunch of acquisitions and some joint ventures and while I was in IR, so I knew a lot of the people. So I said, sure, that sounds like fun. So I did that for a few years based in California and applied the same principle of working hard to make Rajiv and those above me successful, which opened up an opportunity to move to Switzerland. I was there for about 3 years to lead a European finance team, which led to opportunities to learn new disciplines, like getting direct responsibility for our controllership team and getting into marketing analytics, et cetera, which is what led to my first CFO role at StubHub. So I had accumulated all of those experiences over time. And at the time, StubHub had a CFO who was doing FP&A and accounting, and then they had a head of strategy and corporate development, but they really wanted that to be in one role. So I was an obvious candidate for that. So I came back to the Bay Area and joined StubHub, where I stayed for a few years. So I guess, for me, there's a couple of key learnings that came out of that story. First is when people take an interest in you and your success, that you'll go above and beyond to return the favor for them. And then second, that when you're ascending in finance or really any function, you're hired to provide leverage for the people who hired you and above them. So you should aim to do that part of their job better than when they did it, or at least better than the person who was doing it before you. And that tends to get noticed and rewarded. So now, as a CFO, those are the kinds of things I look for in people who join my team. First, they have to want to be there, doing what they do and at that company. And they're good at getting into the details and forming a numerical construct of how the business works, and they can communicate that clearly and simply. And they're humble and they operate in service to the business. And I know you asked for a few, but I'll throw in one more for good measure. Technically a fourth experience. Back in 2013, I joined was a startup at the time called The Real Real, and eventually took them public in 2019. I was the first CFO and really the first finance person. And I had, like any startup, I had lots of hats that I was wearing, like HR and legal and facilities. In some cases, there was no person to do the job, so I did it. I was working with contractors to fix staircases. I was reviewing contracts. I helped stuff consignor checks into envelopes. and I had fun doing it. My feeling was that there's no job too small when you're building something and everything matters. I didn't get hung up on stuff like this isn't a good use of my time or this is beneath me or even I have no qualifications to do this. Unfortunately, as the company grew, I was able to hire great people who did a way better job than me. But I guess the point is that sometimes you don't need to overthink things and just focus on what the task at hand is. Do the job that needs to be done. Sometimes it can be an existential issue. Sometimes it's making sure that employees get paid accurately and on time. Sometimes, sometimes it's making sure there's enough money to pay them. Sometimes it's how to deal with a difficult customer. Sometimes it's just the funky smell in the kitchen. It all matters, and do sweat the small stuff, I guess, and model that behavior in hopes that others will do the same.
That was, and from what I understand, that's like a marketplace for luxury goods. So it was a good match for you coming out of StubHub and eBay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I was connected with marketplaces and spent more than 20 years working in marketplace businesses and in e-commerce broadly. So I obviously like it.
One last thought about eBay. Can you, just given the span of time you were there, how that company grew during your association with it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I joined, this was, 2001, and eBay was in its glory days. Even it was one of the few companies that was growing like crazy, despite the dot-com implosion and all the economic conditions around it. So the company was thriving and was able to bring in lots of great people, and continued to do well for quite some time. Of course, that's changed over time. It was around the time that I was in Europe, around the time of the financial crisis, but that wasn't really related. Where eBay had its first real challenge, where growth wasn't coming so easily, and we needed to change the way we thought. And from the finance functions perspective, it required us to exercise muscles that we hadn't, frankly. Getting really disciplined about cost management, thinking about, do we need to do our first set of layoffs and restructuring of businesses? I got that experience, and that was great. But it, kind of taught me that I certainly prefer growth over cost management,
cost containment. All right. Well, interesting career upward, and you, of course, were at the Real Real for a number of years. You had a long tenure as that company grew, and then, if I'm not jumping too fast forward, the opportunity at WooCommerce. Before we ask you about WooCommerce, have you worked with recruiters? Is that who passes the baton to one company to the next, or helped you do that, or no? Was it networking?
In this case, yes. The market for CFOs is quite competitive, so the recruiters are active, and you see lots of opportunities. But once I took some time off after the Real, and once I decided I wanted to get back in the game, I of course was reaching out to the recruiters who had been trying to get in touch with me, but also did my networking, and tried to run. I took the time to build a framework and be really thoughtful about my move. So in this case, though, yes, it was a really good recruiter who I stay in touch with and become a friend.
And it worked. Well, let's find out about WooCommerce. Of course, it's a company with offerings that I'm familiar with, but perhaps not everyone. Tell us about this company. What does it do, and what are its offerings today?
Yeah, you bet. So WooCommerce is part of the Automatic family of businesses, and it's actually the largest business by revenue within the Automatic family. Automatic's best known and original business is WordPress, which I think is probably what you're most familiar with, because I believe it's the platform that you use your own site to have it powered. And WordPress is quite broad. It powers more than 43% of the internet. Other businesses inside of Automatic include Tumblr, which is an acquisition a number of years ago, Jetpack, and WordPress VIP, focused on enterprises. There's some other ones as well, but those are the main ones. Automatic is a fully distributed company, always has been, with nearly 2,000 employees working from 95 countries and speaking about 120 different languages. Company itself is about 20 years old, and we're still privately held. Our investors include, among others, Tiger, Salesforce Ventures, Insight, Iconic, True Ventures, Wellington, and BlackRock. So great list of marquee investors. So a bit about WooCommerce itself. WooCommerce is the leading open source e-commerce platform. We power 23% of the top million online stores, which by some measures makes Woo the number one e-commerce platform on the internet. Probably not the best known, but in fact, the largest and broadest platform out there. Woo, it naturally is built on WordPress, which gives merchants truly unlimited extensibility, flexibility, and control over how they build and evolve their business. Woo launched as an independent company in 2011. And at the time, they were a developer of themes to kind of style your website. They were acquired by Automatic back in 2015, so about 8 years ago, and then quickly evolved to fill a need for broad e-commerce capabilities for WordPress sites. So, people use WordPress for a variety of reasons. A lot of those reasons carry over to merchants who use Woo. It's things like the unlimited capabilities that Woo offers by combining a core platform with literally hundreds of extensions and themes to personalize and extend your store's capabilities, and the ability to further extend capabilities through customization and custom code. Also, being open source, Woo is freely downloadable. It's a plugin for WordPress, and it's always been part of the open source community. This means that merchants build and own their shop and its code end to end with unlimited hosting options and total control over their experience, their data, their customers, everything. We have a global network of developers and builders and creative professionals that are happy to jump in and assist when you need to bring a vision to life and you don't have either the inclination or the skill set to do so. And then finally, Woo itself is free, as are many of the extensions that merchants need. So as such, Woo is generally the lowest total cost of ownership e-commerce platform. That, of course, matters for everybody and all merchants of all sizes, but especially those who are just starting out and don't want to commit to spending a whole bunch of money on their site before they've started selling things. But we do make revenue on that, despite a lot of the aspects being free. So we earn revenue in multiple ways. Our largest source of revenue is payments, like most of the e-commerce platforms, both through revenue sharing agreements with payment partners like Stripe and PayPal, as well as through our own payment product called Woo Payments. We also earn revenue from strategic partners in areas like marketing and shipping, tax, etc. And those are generally revenue sharing agreements as well. And we also earn money through our own marketplace, where we monetize certain extensions that are paid, and they can be developed by us or by any of the hundreds or thousands of third-party developers who develop very specific extensions to support specific use cases. And we don't really disclose a lot of specific numbers about Woo, but I'll share that it's a very healthy business. Woo's revenue growth is north of 30% year over year, and the business is and has been profitable for quite some time.
So, and just given your background with marketplaces and what have you, it would appear, again, it's sort of along a common theme in some ways.
Yeah.
But we're curious as to what this chapter that you're now opening for Woo is going to be. And Automatic, they acquired it. I don't know what the earlier strategy was or plan, as many years as they have it. You arrived last fall. What chapter are you opening here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, I knew WordPress reasonably well, but Woo was not something that was really top of mind for me. But when I got into the conversation with the recruiter, I realized the massive, tremendous reach and breadth of the platform, combined with a relatively nascent commercial development. So the payment revenue stream, which is by far the majority of our revenue, has only really existed for a few years. So very early innings, and the potential for very good, strong long-term growth was pretty appealing. Obviously, the connection to e-commerce, and frankly, I wanted to, after spending 20 plus years helping run marketplace businesses, I wanted to do something a bit different. And in this chapter in my life, but I wanted to make sure that it did leverage what I knew, which was staying somehow close to e-commerce. So it was, in that sense, was a really good fit. But the way I think the company and Matt Mullenweg, who's the CEO, is thinking about this, of course, Automatic itself is a wonderful company with a great portfolio of businesses. So it could, on its own, go public at some point. But Matt also views Automatic as a bit of a holding company for brands and companies that are both originated and developed within, but also brought in through acquisitions like Woo, like Tumblr, et cetera. And he and the board are very much open to seeing how those businesses could develop and possibly be standalone businesses that are spun out as public companies. So I was brought in, and they were specifically looking for public company ready and public company experience at the leadership level for Woo, to be able to position the company should the right situation line up down the road.
We're curious about acquisitions. Are they a possibility here? Or
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I'm not going to be specific about any of them, but yes.
Organic and inorganic, right?
Yes, organic, inorganic. That it's will always be a part of the strategy, and our thinking around right now. Of course, there is just boundless opportunities and inbound interest of companies that have established some product market fit, but perhaps don't have the runway to execute on it. So we're trying to balance that inbound interest with making sure that we have a coherent M&A strategy that fits with our our longer term strategy. So certainly will be part of the plan.
All right. Well, let me ask you just our standard flow here, where we try to go into your lines of sight in the organization. And clearly, as you joined, you were quite interested in certain numbers. But we're wondering, what are the numbers now that you're watching very closely? You, of course, described this opportunity in the payments world. So we would imagine you're checking that number closely to see if it's growing the way as promising as it has seemed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Woo's a surprisingly complex business given its open source foundation. People can download Woo like they can WordPress in a variety of ways, and most of the time they elect not to share data with us, so we don't really know much about their business. So traditional funnel analysis turns out not to be as useful as it could be in other businesses. At the high level, the way I like to look at the business is tracking both a set of, I guess, just call them permanent metrics that are always important, and they have always been and always will be, but also a set of focus metrics that track how we're doing against our key priorities in the moment. The permanent metrics are the things that you would expect. It's like the total number of active merchants who are using Woo that we can track, the total payment volume of those merchants, how well we're monetizing that TPV, how much revenue are we bringing in from partnership deals, stuff like that. And to your point, the focus metrics are what we are focused on to drive the permanent ones. Currently, among a small set of focus areas, the top one is to increase the number of merchants who are using our payments product, Woo Payments. So not only because it's a key revenue driver for us, but also to focus and provide a lens through which we're focusing our product and marketing efforts to improve the overall Woo platform and experience for merchants and for the developers, who often are the ones who are building sites on behalf of the merchants. And our belief is that if we focus more narrowly on something like this, that's going to have knock-on effects to other metrics in the business.
And the thing about these merchants is that many of them, well, they all began quite small, and your offering was initially free for them. So what's to lose here? So right. Some of the relationship building early on is small businesses that are taking advantage of a very cost-effective model. And then as they mature and as they do more and more revenues, it would seem to me that Woo could play a role in helping them get the tools to build their online businesses. Is that part of the vision, or no? Am I off base a little?
Totally on base. That's exactly right. Out of the box.
And there's so many of them. That's the thing, though. We're talking about. So the challenge is that you have so many of these types of small customers, some of which are no longer small, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't see that as a challenge. I think that's great. I mean, we're enabling entrepreneurs to realize their dream without burdening them with a hefty bill to run a site. Of course, there's lots of opportunities for them to give us money, but for the value that's provided to them, oftentimes that makes sense.
But with your background, you might know some of the pain points that marketplaces have as they continue to grow, and what their needs might be.
Yeah, you bet. Some of those we can't solve for them.
I want to touch on, particularly with you, I'd be curious, just given your long roots in the Silicon Valley there, AI, what does it mean for there are two questions, really. What does it mean for this business? How is Woo going to use or leverage AI? And then I'm curious, as a finance leader, how AI might help you as well. But maybe the first question, and I'm sure you guys have had lengthy conversations in all sorts of directions on this. What would you share with us?
Yeah, you bet we have. I mean, obviously, it's a big conversation happening in e-commerce and the world. It feels like AI is going to change everything. And merchants are also curious about how AI can help them be more efficient, engage with their shoppers, help build and scale their operations, et cetera. So I guess we're thinking about it from a couple of lenses right now, broadly in the company. And I'll get to the finance part as well. First is, in the easiest and the most direct application, is how can we use AI to drive, I guess, productivity and efficiency in certain parts of our operations. Customer support is the easiest example, and our customer support organization is referred to as happiness. So we're using AI already to increase productivity, it's making it easier for the happiness engineers to access the right answer based on all of the answers that have been provided historically. It's improving response times. It's just generally helping our merchants get the help they need faster, better and faster information. So it's kind of a win-win. It's not just about AI replacing people. It's enabling people to do their jobs more efficiently and better. And then separately, we're just beginning to see how profound AI can be for the platform and for the product itself. So we're running some tests to make it easy to set up a better store using AI to develop custom themes for people that represent your brand, and picking up cues based on the type of business that you're operating, and maybe some of the things that you're providing. Like you pick a font, and it just sort of styles everything and makes it really easy. We'll have more to launch soon, but we plan to build out AI functionality into every aspect of the merchant experience. But we also want to be intentional and thoughtful, and not just add stuff for the sake of having AI. But the functionality that our merchants are telling us that they could use help with include things like how to do inventory tracking better, and order tracking, describing products. Just put in a simple description and have AI build a beautiful product description, and sometimes including photos, and writing copy. So this will be a quickly evolving thing over the coming months, but really great for merchants. It's going to make it so much easier to set up a store and really get to the business that they want. They don't want to be, building websites and maintaining them. They want to sell stuff. So I guess in terms of the second question is around how I think about it from the perspective of finance. I think it's too soon to say, honestly. My personal focus is, and I think the lowest hanging fruit seems to be in what I've just described in terms of productivity and product improvements. So really making sure that we are embracing that appropriately and sort of spreading it across the company. Because that obviously has benefits from the finance guy's perspective. I think there will be some interesting applications for accounting and finance. I don't think they're great today, Personally, I'd be happy to see AI assist in streamlining some of the more monotonous work, like closing the books and generating management reporting, doing some basic trend analysis, and leaving more time for the people to do more value added work and have a more engaging, varied, and enjoyable job. So I don't see AI replacing anything. Similar to the customer support example, I see it as a supplementary tool to increase the productivity, effectiveness, and quality of the team.
Would you anticipate that the ERP platform, and I'll assume you have one or use one,
Yeah.
and are they likely to be enhanced so you can have AI capabilities or advantages AI offers in your current platform? I mean, it's not something you're going to have to add on to, or
No, it'll come. I think, frankly, every company needs to have an AI strategy today. So certainly, we use NetSuite, so they're definitely working on some things there as well. And I've actually been part of a couple of conversations with CFOs about this. Everyone's question is like, am I supposed to be doing something with AI right now in my world? So it hasn't, our area hasn't gotten a lot of attention just yet, but it's going to happen pretty quickly. I don't personally see it being fundamental to the work that we do, but important.
I didn't really ask you a metric specific question. And what we're interested in is whether there's particular metric that since you arrived again last fall, that you have sought to draw attention to, or maybe it's a business dynamic. Is there something you've drawn more attention to, or try to educate the organization a little differently about? Is there some measurement that wasn't getting the love it deserved, and you've made a point of you know just making it the top of multiple conversations?
Yeah. I get where you're going. I mean, I guess I wouldn't add a lot to the earlier question we were covering metrics, which is the permanent metrics they predated me and like they're the right ones. But I think what I've been trying to do, because we're in a distributed culture with a lot of autonomy. There's this tendency for people to kind of follow what's interesting or where they think they could add value. So there's a lot of work to do to focus the organization on a finite and a really very small set of priorities. So that's why I use the example of driving Woo payment merchant growth. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that goes around that. We want those merchants to be successful in processing TPV because that's where ultimately we're going to get our revenue. But there are others on it. So I think it's things like, rather than saying, hey, we need to grow our total merchant base. Well, how do you do that when that's coming from all these different things and partners and coming through hosting platforms, et cetera? So just focusing our energies on something that we can control, but being mindful of the decisions that we make so that they will benefit more broadly than just that thing. So I think that's the thing that I'm trying to bring, is just focused attention on controllable metrics.
Okay. We are up to our finance strategic moment question. I explained to you it's just a generic one that I ask like this. So share with us a moment of strategic insight that you've experienced along the way. Can be any time. It might have happened last week. It might have been 20 years ago. Tell us, what would that be?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been around the block, so there's quite a few. But I guess the one I'll use today is from my time at the Real Real. So the company's a managed marketplace for the resale of authenticated pre-owned luxury goods. That's a mouthful, but it's a consignment model, which means that the company takes possession of all the goods that it sells so that they can be authenticated, and also so that the company takes on all of the work of selling on behalf of the sellers, like taking the photos and writing the descriptions, pricing the product, fulfillment, customer service, everything. And naturally, with all of that work comes a lot of cost. So it was a challenge to define a path to profitability. Most of the resources in the company were and are in sales and operations positions. Salespeople are the people who bring in the products from consigners, often going to their homes and doing it. And the operations people performed all the functions I described in the warehouse or the authentication centers. So it was natural to focus a lot to be productive and efficient in those areas. And while certainly important, that wasn't sufficient. And the model that we had made that clear. But it was really about bringing the organization along to see more holistically about the what truly drove the profitability of the company. So I worked with my FP&A team to build a construct of all of the profitability levers in the company and which ones had the most leverage. And sometimes it was a little bit surprising or counterintuitive. And then we built a framework for how we proposed to get to break even. So the output of that was pretty clear. First, we weren't going to cost cut our way to profitability. We weren't going to drive so much productivity in the warehouses that alone could do it. So we needed to maintain a focus on growth to achieve a certain level of scale that would allow us to cover our fixed costs for things like warehouses and offices and overhead, so forth. So we reframed that. So it's like, it's not growth at all costs. It's growth for a purpose. It's growth to get to scale. So we put out a specific number for GMV that was kind of the gold standard that would allow us to get to profitability, and reframed our focus from growth to profitable growth. Then we laid out how much leverage there were in other parts of the P&L and really up further toward the top of the P&L. So we used a unit economics framework for this and translated orders into gross profit dollars, variable costs, and fixed costs. And we showed that even with scale and variable expense efficiency, we still needed to improve the gross profit contribution on a per order basis. But at the time, there were no teams responsible for the gross profit levers, which included things like our take rate or the price, what we would keep from the order, average order value, and shipping costs. So we took it upon ourselves to set up cross-functional groups to build a strategy to improve these things. So we did a category and a price point profitability analysis. As take rates varied somewhat between categories. Generally, the lower price goods would never be profitable given the high cost structure, which didn't vary all that much to process a cheaper item. And certain higher price categories were more profitable than others given competitive dynamics. For example, watches are really competitive, so we might only keep 12 to 15%, but a piece of jewelry at the same price point, we could maybe keep 30%. So we worked with all the teams, marketing, merchandising, sales, and product to build a pricing strategy, and by pricing, I mean take rate, to increase our net take rate while maintaining or increasing our average order size, and at the same time improving the product selection and the vibrancy in the marketplace. So a couple of examples what that would have meant. It was taking a higher take rate for lower price products, and then working with the sales team to incentivize them to focus on our most profitable categories, things like jewelry and handbags and things like that. And then we built out a central operations team that had experience and responsibility negotiating and driving material savings and shipping costs. So just putting a lot more focus where we could drive a lot of leverage up on the top line. Then we laid out how much variable expense productivity would be needed if we did that. If we got the scale, we increased the gross profit contribution of the order, and we held fixed costs essentially flat, then we're kind of solving for, now what do we really truly need all those people expenses and how productive do they really need to be? And the answer was that if we could do all those other things, the improvements were actually modest and achievable if done consistently, wouldn't require step change. So that kind of gave everyone sort of a sigh of relief. Say, okay, this is achievable, and got everybody sort of lined up against now. And the company is still on this journey, but you still see a lot of that framework in use today with a balanced focus across all three parts of the profitability equation, rather than just a maniacal focus on the most visible one.
From episode 850, this is 1 Minute with Anat Ashkenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly.
And I think the combination of strategy and finance are that's the intersection that I enjoy the most, which gives you the ability to think about both the short term and the long term, but all in one continuum. You're not trying to maximize one over the other, but you're trying to maximize both for the firm over the long period of time. And that's what I found over the years most exciting. So before I took the CFO role, I had a dual role, and I was the controller. So I had all of our global CFOs in my organization, accounting, external reporting, etc., but also served as the chief strategy officer for the firm. And that gave me a really unique and broad perspective on the business before stepping into the CFO role. But it's in that intersection.
Wow. Nice. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where I'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We'd like you to think back to that first 60 days you first stepped into a CFO role. So I'll allow you to choose whether it was at StubHub or the Real. But what is the piece of advice you would give yourself as you take on the responsibilities, really? And we're looking for the first time, so maybe it was StubHub. There's something you wish someone had told you. What would you go back in time and tell yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'll give you two. One that somebody actually did tell me. I've had the great fortune to have several great managers and mentors along the way who've offered lots of sage advice. One that I didn't really internalize at the time, but really has stayed with me, which was be the duck. And the gist of that is that people read a lot of things into your tone of voice or your body language and all these sort of cues. And people don't really like it when they see any finance person, certainly the CFO, being outwardly stressed or frantic. So while it's inevitable that there'll be reasons to be stressed and frantic and have that anxiety, the point is to not let that spread virally. So the analogy is your feet under the surface may be flapping frantically, but above the surface, you should see a calm, cool, and collected duck smoothly gliding across the surface.
Nice.
And then the second one, I guess I wish I had been informed more, is that fundraising is hard. It can take quite a bit of time. And in a business like the Real that was pretty capital intensive, required essentially annual fundraising adventures that could go 3 to 6 months, which were quite distracting from staying plugged in operationally. So had I known that, I think I would have put more of an effort to really hire in advance of that, to have really strong finance lieutenants. I did eventually, but I was a little bit late to that, who would need to kind of take over while I was down in the trenches raising money every year.
Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. We're wondering, Matt, if you have maybe a personal habit or part of a daily routine that over time you've become known for. That's how Matt does it. He's stuck to it. Anything come to mind? Personal habit, routine, something you do?
Yeah, well, simple one is I like to start meetings with a little bit of levity. Either just talking about personal stuff or cracking a joke. But another thing is that I'm a big to-do list person. I always have been. I write one first thing every morning. And usually it includes the word breathe, which means get outside and literally breathe some fresh air. And that can be as simple as walking the dog, but preferably it's going out in my backyard here in Mount Tam in Marin and getting my heart pounding on a nice hike. Lately, I've been experimenting with something called the Sparks approach, which is based on neuroscientific research from Harvard that suggests that movement and exercise supercharges our mental circuits, enables us to grasp information more easily and retain it longer, which means doing that breathing, getting that exercise vigorously in the morning before starting the big brain work. So that's been a bit of a challenge for me to really be disciplined about doing it first thing in the morning, but I find it actually does help quite a bit. I feel a lot better, fresher, and more energetic after getting the heart up for about 20 minutes. And I combine that with intermittent fasting, which frankly started accidentally during COVID when I was sitting at this computer and starting my day earlier and would just forget to eat. But I later found it made me feel better and made my exercise better and my mind clearer in the morning. So the things I like to do.
Great. Thank you for sharing those. We also always wonder if you have a book selection for us. It doesn't have to be a business book. It might be something you escape with. Anything?
Yeah, I don't tend to use reading to escape. I use reading to learn. And I love to read. I like the phrase "leaders are readers." So a couple of business books that have been important to me have been Atomic Habits by James Clear and The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. Both are in one way or another about changing your mindset and driving change ultimately. So they're super useful, not only when you're transitioning from one company to another, but could be from one job to another within the same company. Or I even use them periodically when I'm in the same role to give me a framework to reassess what the most important things to be done are at a given point in time and how to approach the problem. Right now, I'm reading a book called Brave Parenting of how to raise emotionally resilient children that don't rely on their parents all the time to solve their problems.
That's excellent. I'm sure people will take note. But thank you for those. We are up to our final question where we ask you to look forward finally. And we're wondering what your priorities are as CFO of WooCommerce for the next 12 months. What are your priorities?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm still relatively new in my role, so I guess my priorities would look like somebody who's kind of new in the role. But they're always going to be some version of people, processes, and systems. And this time of year, like every finance person in the world, we're gearing up for annual planning. This is going to be my first one at Woo, so I'm thinking a lot about the process itself. What did we learn from processes in years past? What worked? What didn't? How can we do things better? What process can we use to increase the likelihood of success in terms of aligning on the right things, making sure that they're tied to expected results, and staying focused and holding ourselves accountable for excellent execution. I think we've got a lot of opportunity to get better at that in Woo. And related to that, I'm thinking about talent needs, not just in terms of the teams I'm directly responsible for, but also across all of Woo to ensure that we have the right skill sets to execute on our plans. And of course, how can I do my best job to support and mentor the people in my team? With respect to systems, it's wide reaching, but I suppose I'm thinking about like our forecasting model. Is it good enough? Does it reflect the business and its drivers? Do we have an understanding? Are our management reporting systems effective? Are they calling out the right things? Are we getting the right insights? We've already touched on it, but how should we use AI to help us be more effective? Things like that.
Matt Gustke, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks. It's been great.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.